50 companies signed the letter. Anthropic did not. And the reason has almost nothing to do with open models. Over the past week, the American AI industry held the closest thing it has ever had to a public vote. NVIDIA's Jensen Huang made the first post of his entire life on X to back a letter defending downloadable AI. Microsoft signed. Meta signed. Then Google signed. Then OpenAI signed. Inside about a day, the roster had doubled to 50 names, and exactly one frontier lab was still standing outside it. On Monday, that lab finally answered, and what it said was not what anybody expected. Because this is not a story about whether open models are good. Every single party in this fight already agrees that they are. It is a story about one word, one number, and who gets hurt by it. Let us map the whole thing. Start with the spark, because it came from Washington, not from a lab. On Tuesday, July 21st, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent went on Fox Business and said something that changed the temperature of the entire debate. He said officials had found watermarks of American large language models on many of the Chinese models, and he called that unacceptable. Then came the line that landed hardest. When Chinese firms conduct covert, industrial-scale distillation attacks that cross the line into intellectual property theft, he said, sanctions and entity list designations will be on the table. Note carefully what he did and did not say. Bessent explicitly stated the administration supports open-source models. His threat was aimed at a technique, not at openness. That distinction is the entire episode, and almost every headline that week lost it. One day later, the pushback arrived from the least likely direction, the company that sells the hardware. On Wednesday, July 22nd, Jensen Huang sat down with Axios and did something no other American chief executive was willing to do that week. He praised the Chinese models by name. These Chinese models are excellent, he said. Open-source models that are excellent should be used. He argued the United States should not ban this kind of model at all. And when asked about the fear that a Chinese open model could act as a backdoor for Beijing, he called that a misconception, pointing out that the weights are downloadable and the safeguards are customizable by whoever runs them. He also, to his credit, said the quiet part out loud. Wider adoption of good models, wherever they come from, drives demand for NVIDIA's compute. Then Friday, July 24th, it stopped being interviews and became a document. A 3-page open letter went out under the title Open Weights and American AI Leadership, published as a PDF on NVIDIA's own servers, carrying 25 founding signatures. And Huang, who had joined X but had never once posted, chose that moment for his debut. His first message on the platform was this: open models strengthen safety and cybersecurity, accelerate innovation and diffusion, and enable sovereignty. The world, he wrote, needs both frontier closed models and frontier open models. Reporting put the post past 11 million views within hours. Microsoft's Satya Nadella amplified it from his own account. A hardware CEO had just made himself the public face of a software policy fight. Now look at who actually signed, because the founding list is stranger than the coverage suggested. The original 25 included NVIDIA and Microsoft and Meta, which you would expect. But it also included IBM and Dell, Hugging Face and Mozilla, Mistral and Perplexity and Replit, Andreessen Horowitz and Y Combinator, and the one that raises eyebrows, CrowdStrike and Palantir. A security company and a defense-adjacent analytics company put their names on a document arguing that publishing model weights makes the country safer, not less safe. That is not the coalition you draw up if this were a simple story about open-source idealists versus national security hawks. And more revealing still is who was missing on day one: OpenAI, Google, Amazon, and Anthropic. All 4 of the labs and clouds with the most to lose were absent from the founding roster. And then the list moved fast. Within roughly a day of Huang's post, the roster jumped from 25 to about 35, and by the weekend reporting put the PDF at 50 signatories. The new names tell you where the pressure landed. AMD joined, Cisco joined, Cloudflare joined, GitHub, Block, and Alma joined. And critically, both of the labs that had sat out on Friday reversed. Google signed, and then OpenAI signed. Think about what that means for OpenAI specifically, a company that had spent the previous week widely reported as pressing Washington for tighter scrutiny of Chinese open models. Within about 72 hours, it had put its name on the letter arguing against exactly that kind of broad restriction. Whatever else this letter accomplished, it worked as a loyalty test, and almost everyone took it. Which leaves the two names that never appeared on any version, Amazon and Anthropic. And those two are not a coincidence, because Amazon is Anthropic's largest outside investor and its primary cloud partner. So the holdout is not one company being stubborn. It is one company and the balance sheet standing behind it. By the weekend, the framing had hardened everywhere. 50 against 1, the industry versus the safety lab, Anthropic alone in dissent. That framing is clean, it is dramatic, and, as Monday would demonstrate, it was substantially wrong. Because nobody had actually asked Anthropic what its position was. They had inferred it from an empty line on a signature page. So read the letter properly, because buried in a 3-page document is the sentence the whole fight turns on. The letter does not only defend open weights. It defends distillation, the practice of using one model's outputs to help train or improve another. In the letter's own framing, distillation is a widely used technique for model improvement, evaluation, and validation. It concedes the concern is legitimate, then says those concerns should be addressed through targeted legal and commercial frameworks rather than sweeping restrictions on techniques that play an important role in AI innovation. Everything else in the letter is consensus material. Expand compute access for startups and researchers. Invest in shared training assets. Keep the frontier plural by avoiding premature restrictions. Nobody was going to refuse to sign over compute access for universities. The distillation clause is the load-bearing wall. Monday, July 27th, Anthropic published its answer, a post titled Simply Our Position on Open Weights Models, under Chief Executive Dario Amadei's name. And the first line demolishes the framing the whole week had been built on. Anthropic has never advocated for a ban on open weights models, he wrote. Then he went further than that, in a sentence you would not predict from the coverage. Open weights models that do not have dangerous capabilities are a public good. Read that again, because it is not a grudging concession. The company cast for 4 days as the lone opponent of open models had just published, in writing, that open models are a public good. The 50 versus 1 story did not survive contact with the actual document. So where is the actual disagreement? Amadei names 3 asks, and only one of them is contested. First, do not sell powerful chips or chip-making equipment to China and crack down on smuggling. Second, crack down on industrial-scale distillation operations. Third, all sufficiently capable models, open and closed, should go through mandatory safety testing, applied regardless of country of origin, and explicitly exempting less capable models from startups and academia. Now line that up against the letter. On chips, the letter is silent. On mandatory testing, the letter is silent. The two documents collide on exactly one point. The letter calls industrial-scale distillation a technique to be handled with targeted legal frameworks. Anthropic calls it an operation to be cracked down on. That is the width of the gap. 1 word, 2 verbs. Which raises the obvious question. Why would one lab care about that single word enough to eat 4 days of bad press over it? The answer is a document Anthropic filed 6 weeks earlier. On June 10th, Anthropic wrote to senior members of the United States Senate Banking Committee alleging that operators connected to Alibaba's Quinn Lab had run a distillation campaign against Claude. The specifics are what make it land. Roughly 25,000 fraudulent accounts, 28.8 million exchanges, compressed into a 44-day window between April 22nd and June 5th. Anthropic described it as brazen and illicit and characterized the goal as training Quinn to match its frontier model on software engineering, multi-step reasoning, and cybersecurity. To be scrupulously fair, those figures are Anthropic's allegation, and Alibaba denies wrongdoing. And there is a second thread, running straight into the model at the center of this whole story. On July 22nd, Michael Axios, the White House Science and Technology Policy Director, publicly accused Moonshot AI of using distillation to copy an American model when it built Kimi K3. TechCrunch reported the administration's accusation as specifically naming Anthropic's Fable model as the source. Now hold that next to the calendar. Kimi K3 launched July 16th. Its full weights went public July 27th, the same day Anthropic published its position. So the letter asking Washington to treat distillation as a normal engineering technique was circulating in the same week that the White House was accusing a Chinese lab of distilling one specific American company's model. That company is the one that did not sign. So here is the map that actually explains the signature page, and it is not ideology. It is exposure. NVIDIA sells compute, and every model that gets adopted anywhere on Earth increases demand for it. Huang said so himself. Microsoft, Google, and Amazon rent that compute out. More models running means more instances built. Hugging Face and Algolia exist to distribute open weights. Mozilla and Y Combinator are structurally on the side of the small player. Every one of those businesses gets healthier when weights circulate freely. Now find the company whose entire revenue depends on a capability that cannot be copied cheaply, that has publicly alleged 28 million attempts to copy it, and that Washington says was the source for the very model this fight is about. That is not one lab against 50 companies. That is one business model against a different business model, and the letter simply drew the line where the money already was. Now let us score this with numbers instead of vibes, starting with the developer audience. We pulled the Hacker News data directly. The story about NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Meta warning against overregulating open models reached 655 points with 317 comments. Anthropic's dissenting position post reached 494 points with 701 comments. Fewer votes, more than double the argument. Run the ratio, and it is stark. About 0.48 comments per point for the letter, about 1.42 for the dissent, roughly 3 times the contention per unit of approval. On a forum, upvotes measure agreement and comments measure disagreement. The industry's consensus document was applauded and scrolled past. The holdout's explanation is what people actually stayed to fight about. Now the market scoreboard, and to be completely clear, what follows is fact, not investment advice. We pulled the closes ourselves. Measure from Thursday, July 23rd, the session before the letter dropped, through Monday, July 27th, the session after Kimi K3's weights went public. NVIDIA closed at $208.76, then $196.51, down 5.9%. AMD went $539.69 to $494.95, down 8.3%. Meta slipped 2%, Amazon under 1%. But Microsoft rose about 2%, and Google rose about 2.8%. Same news window, opposite directions. And that split is worth sitting with, because it contains an irony. The two loudest advocates for open weights that week were NVIDIA and Microsoft. Over that same window, NVIDIA fell almost 6%, while Microsoft rose about 2%. The company that spent its chief executive's first ever social media post defending open models had the worst week of the two. We should be careful here. A 4-session window contains a great deal besides one letter, and no single cause can be assigned. But the shape is at least consistent with a simple reading the market has been rehearsing all month. Cheap, capable open weights are ambiguous news for whoever sells the silicon, and considerably friendlier news for whoever rents it out by the hour and sells the software layer on top. So what actually happens next? And the first item has a date on it. August 1st is the deadline for the White House Frontier Model Review Framework, and it is 4 days out from this recording. That framework is where the abstract argument becomes an enforceable rule, and notice that Anthropic's third ask, mandatory safety testing for all sufficiently capable models regardless of origin, is precisely the kind of thing such a framework could contain. The letter's 50 signatories did not argue against that. They argued against restrictions on open models as a category. If the framework lands as capability-triggered testing rather than a country of origin ban, then both sides can credibly claim they won, and the 50 versus 1 story ends with no loser at all. Two more things to watch. First, watch whether the word distillation acquires a legal definition, because right now it does not have one. Besant's threat, the letters defense, and Anthropic's crackdown request all use the same term to mean three different scopes of activity, and entity list designations cannot run on a word that vague. Whoever gets to write the definition wins the argument retroactively. Second, watch Amazon. It is the only signature page absence nobody has explained, and it is the one company with a foot in both camps, a major investor in the holdout, and a hyperscaler whose business grows every time an open model gets deployed. If Amazon signs, the holdout is genuinely alone. If it keeps not signing, then the coalition of 50 is smaller than the number makes it sound. That is your AI Daily Deep Dive. A hardware chief executive breaking his silence to defend software he does not sell. 50 signatures assembled in about a day. One absence that everybody read as opposition, and that turned out to be a disagreement over a single verb. And underneath all of it, 28.8 million reasons why the company with the most to lose from copying was never going to sign a letter that calls copying a technique. Watch August 1st. If this is the kind of breakdown you want, sources checked, numbers pulled, framing tested rather than repeated, subscribe, and we will keep going deeper. See you in the next one.